I learned something. Little boys couldn't care less what he looked like underneath the clothing. Girls, probably with a Barbie doll, would care. But little boys just took it in stride, and that came out fine. So it never really was a problem once we learned about it.
We finally brought the metal soldier to Hugh O'Connor. Hugh started immediately building a one-cavity mold of each part so that they might possibly meet Toy Fair in February '64.
The immensity of doing Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Corps. Again, Merrill and our people were concerned that how can we get it all done? I tell you what, I was asked, why don't we just come out with Army at first and really do a job on Army? I had been so involved and enmeshed in this, I said to my boss, please, let's not do that. If we don't do Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Corps, make a statement to the world that this is our concept, our property. Somebody else is going to jump in very quickly because they could do that once they see what we did, and they will do the other services. We've got to protect our flanks, is the way I said it in a military term. And again, Merrill Hassenfeld thought for a moment. He said, okay, we'll work it out. We'll get the finances to do it. We'll make it happen.
When the metal model was turned over to Huey, it did not have a head. It just had the neck with the ribs in it where a head could be snapped on. Walter Hansen had tried a head, but it wasn't accepted by Don.
So when they would bring me these faces, and I'd look at them, and I guess it was wrong. I was predetermined to do something that was a general kind of all-American G.I. Joe. I never saw that. And one day, again, I believe it was Sam Spear, said to me that someplace up in Massachusetts, near us in New England, was a very famous sculptor.
I called up Phil Krakowski and wondered if he'd meet with me.
He did busts of Jack Kennedy,
Curtis LeMay, J. Edgar Hoover. He was certainly a quality sculptor.
I think if you conveyed to him what we're looking for, he would be able to do this.
Phil told us that it would be done within the week in what we call plastiline, rough modeling. So in about a week, Phil showed up at the plant and showed me what he had. It looked good, but of course Don would be the final answer on it.
And he wasn't putting up with any nonsense, and the attitude was, this is the head, if you don't like it, there's the door.
When Sam came back from picking up the head from Phil Krakowski, and he had it on his desk, it was like he was holding the Holy Grail. I mean, he just really was just awestruck.
To go with G.I. Joe Action Sailor, there are these exciting Navy packages. Equipment for sea rescue, for frogman, for Navy attack, and U.S. Navy shore patrol. Children will be fascinated by the detail in the regulation equipment. Life preservers, scuba suits, scuba tanks, swim fins, complete shore patrol gear. G.I. Joe Action Sailor brings a new kind of action realism to playing soldier.
At that particular time, we said, what is the name going to be of this particular concept? So we had working names like Ace the fighter pilot, Rocky the Marine. And at that time, we thought that this is pretty good, this will be fine. We had a very small advertising agency in New York that was owned and run by two gentlemen. One's name was Fred Bruns, he was the older gentleman, B-R-U-N-S. The other one was Don Bruns. And at that time, having some insight into what we were doing, Fred Bruns came back one day and said to me, you know, I think this is great, the buyers have seen it, but you need a special name. By having all of these different names, it's like shooting buckshot. We're not going to hit the target. You need one name, and forget about all these other names. And one night, I'm sitting in my den, and I'm watching television, and a black and white movie comes on. It's called The Story of G.I. Joe. And that reaffirmed, I said, wait a minute, this is fate again, is doing something to us. We had a trademark attorney, Elliot Salter, at that time, and Elliot looked into it. And we found out that the name G.I. Joe was registered for a comic book, and it was registered for a candy bar. But it was never registered in whatever the classification is for toys, 22 or 23 or whatever. And we decided to trademark this and register it. After that, I went all over the world, making sure that Hasbro, that we own the name G.I. Joe. But the synergistic connection between the name G.I. Joe and what we did, I honestly say has a lot to do with why you and I are sitting here 35 years later, still talking about G.I. Joe. It works.
When I first got those initial weapons, the M1, the carbine, the machine guns, we were supposed to have them for a week or two, but we had them for about 4 weeks. And General Holland called Merrill Hassenfeld one day and said, "Merrill, the Inspector General is coming from Washington for an inspection of my command. Are you going to give me back the weapons, or should I send them to your place to inspect them?"
There was a gentleman at that time who was vice president of Hasbro named Bill Pressman, who had traveled extensively in the toy business. And he said to Merrill Hassenfeld, Don and I will go overseas together and we will seek out suppliers to make this. And we had a lot of hand samples and a lot of stuff that our product development department gave us. And we went to Japan. We worked with a company named Sanye. In Japanese, Ichi ni San. San is 3. And Sanye were 3 partners that ran this particular manufacturing company.
A lot of it was done in the island of Kyushu. And I remember stories of my brother coming back from the Far East telling me of all of the trials and the tribulations.
And Sanye would go out into small fishing villages around Japan, around Tokyo, and give out G.I. Joe's uniforms to be made. The mayor of most of these towns would ride a bicycle, and he would go collecting the clothing from these women who may have been nursing their kids in their houses. And I would go into these towns, and it was like Bawana Don was coming into the town. Everybody was putting together the clothing.
And then they actually moved down the sourcing of it to Hong Kong, to HKI, Hong Kong Industrial.
I met with some lawyers there in Hong Kong called solicitors, and I said at that time I'd like to trademark and copyright G.I. Joe. And they looked at this and they said, "Mr. Levine, you can't own and copyright the human body." I said, "I want to own this body." And they said, "We all own our own bodies. You can't own the human body. But what we would recommend is that you do something sort of special for G.I. Joe. If you could figure out something special, then we know whoever goes and makes it or knocks it off, we can stop them." And I thought about it right then in the office, and I said, "Let's put a scar on his face."
Anything I could do to not make it look like a doll, I was happy. Because he was going to have a real grenade and a gun, that was going to help too. But a scar, he'd been through battle. And I threw that out at that meeting. But we didn't hear from that in a long time. There was no scar, except Don wrote me a letter from Hong Kong at a later date saying, "Hey, we should put a scar on his cheek." Well, at that time, I walked over to Walter and I said, "Look," I took a pencil, it just seemed a natural place for a scar to be. So I said, "Here, put a little scar on his face there."
Someone just made a sarcastic comment about the G.I. Joe scar, and everybody shrugged their shoulders and just laughed. Said, "Well, that's Don. Like let Don have his way." It was obvious the scar was there for a reason, and again, this was the masculine imprint. This was not going to be a pretty boy Ken.
And that became very important and significant for G.I. Joe, which we did. Several companies did that. They copied G.I. Joe they copied a doll with a scar, and we were able to stop them because of that.
To go with G.I. Joe Action Pilot, there are thrilling sets of Air Force equipment. Everything from scramble to survival, and of course, dress uniforms. High-altitude helmets, flight suits, pad and clipboard, air vests, flare guns, all the gear necessary so that G.I. Joe Action Pilot can bring a new kind of action realism to plain soldier.
One of the things I was definitely so sure of was the packaging and how we would present it to the world. I wanted packaging people that would just give this Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Corps enthusiasm and excitement. And I have to give credit, I believe it was to a fellow named George Barton, who has since passed away, who was in charge of our art department. He and Sam sat down and said, "Don is looking for this and we're looking for that." And they came up with this Thresher and Petrucci.
The first item in doing the boxes was we have to come up with a logo for G.I. Joe. Harold and I worked on probably at least a dozen different logos. It was the final one now that you see now on the boxes, which actually was our main choice. Everybody said, well, we got to make it a little more, unusual, and it was almost like everybody said, let's put one of the G.I. Joe heads on top of the eye. Every branch of the service has their own little head on top, and it makes a nice logo. This whole project took about 75 different packages, which had to be ready in time for the toy fair. There were so many illustrations that had to be done, so we had a friend, George Eisenberg, and we called him in to help us do the illustrations.
This rang a bell because it has revived my memories of an exciting period of my life aboard a combat destroyer during World War II. And I had so much experience in this regards, I was quite excited about getting involved with this whole new project.
When doing the illustrations, they had to be authentic. So this meant we had to get authentic uniforms.
We tried to think in terms of what kind of a person is G.I. Joe? Is he a person? No. He was America, the American conscience. He was the Army, Navy, Air Force. He was everything. We had to find some way of identifying everybody under one name.
Now we had a model, so we'd have, different people pose in the positions we wanted with the uniforms.
I found this pilot in dress and asked him if he would pose, and sure enough, he was very obliging. Got him standing up, sitting down, running, doing everything possible to fill that little slotted area that was given to me.
This became more fun than doing the illustrations sometimes, because I did a lot of the posing myself. But there were a lot of models that some of these people, they thought this was the greatest thing when they saw these toys, and they knew that they posed for the pictures. Either dad didn't have children, they'd be out buying the boxes to show or giving as gifts for Christmas to their nephews. And so that was a fun part of it. Even the Jeeps and everything we drew was very authentic, because we did go to the source and make sure we had the right thing. And this probably had a lot to do with the success of this.
We had to get together the entire line, which then consisted of 75 packages. They wanted to take it into New York to show it to various buyers to get their reaction.
He took a group of rooms in New York City, I think it was the Regent or Regency Hotel, and a few days before we showed it to 5 or 6 key buyers.
And Sam and I and whoever else came with us went into one of the back rooms, and we were listening with the door slightly ajar as Don Levine and Merrill Hassenfeld and whoever else was involved was showing it to the buyer from Woolworths and I think from Sears, the really big guys.